exam was very different from the other exams. It had focused on the basics and the practicals more and has developed my interest in science.
Hello everyone, my name is Akshan Rawat and I'm from Public School near Kant. So I would also like to thank the team CAM and CSIR for conducting such a beautiful excursion trip for us.
They're very interactive, they seem to be deeply interested in science, and it must have taken some kind of selection, because I do see without selection groups of students that come to us. I think we need more such programs, or at least we need to grow whatever programs we have to a large extent.
Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible to you. I'm audible, right, Sohade?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. A very good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the 33rd fortnightly session on exploring descriptive writing techniques, exclusively for students from class 5th to 12th, organized by the Knowledge and Awareness Mapping Platform. I, Aniket Arora, convener CAMP, will moderate this session today. Today we have with us Mr. Sohardev De, PM Yuva author, Mr. Ashish Kumar Mittal, Project Director of CAMP, Ms. Arika Mathur, Project Head of CAMP, and of course, our amazing students who have joined us today. I welcome you all. Knowledge and Awareness Mapping Platform is an initiative and knowledge alliance of CSIR NISPA, National Institute of Science Communication and Policy Research, Ministry of Science and Technology, with industrial partner NCPL, NISA Communication Private Limited. In today's workshop, we will explore descriptive writing techniques. Descriptive writing technique is a style of writing that focuses on providing detailed and vivid descriptions of people, places, objects, events, or emotion. The goal of descriptive writing is to create a sensory and immersive experience for the reader, allowing them to visualize and connect with what's being described. This type of writing often appeals to the reader's senses, emotions, and imagination, making the text come alive in their minds. But before we proceed with today's session, I would like to announce that registration for NASA 2023 is open. Students from class 5th to 12th can conveniently register on our website at www.camp.res.in. Registered students can also get access to interesting podcasts, journals, and articles from CSIR NISPA under the student login. So visit our website today, www.camp.res.in, to learn more about CAMP. Also, I would like to mention that recently CAMP organized its 9th scientific excursion on the 17th of August at CSIR's National Metallurgical Laboratory in Jamshedpur, Jharkhand. The main objective of the program was to enhance scientific temperament and create awareness and knowledge of scientific aptitude among school students. In this exclusive excursion, 112 students and 5 teachers participated from different schools from Jharkhand, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, and Odisha. The students got a chance to attend lectures on artificial intelligence and machine learning, artificial intelligence solutions for iron and steel industry, and interact with scientists at the CSIR NML. After the enlightening lecture, the students were taken for a lab visit to the Urban Ore Recycling Center and also the creep testing facility, which is the largest in Southeast Asia. After lunch, the students also did a hands-on activity where they did a small coin battery and mutual induction experiment. The students and teachers were very happy with the overall experience and have a lifetime memory to preserve. You can check out the images on social media and on the gallery of our website www.camp.res.in. If you would also like to participate in such excursions and get a chance to explore, discover, and engage with various scientific disciplines in real world setting at various eminent CSIR laboratories or research organizations in India, then check out the link below to know more on how you can participate. But coming back to today's session, we have with us Mr. Soharde, who is a 19-year-old author and the recipient of the Pradhan Mantri Rashtriya Bal Puraskar. He has self-published 3 books on Indian history and mythology: Scion of Suryavansh, the Ramayana in English, the Chronicles of Suryavansh, the rise and fall of the Suryavanshis, and Pratap Jung, the ultimate sacrifice. Moreover, he is also a columnist for the Sunday Guardian and podcaster, hosting a show called Cosmographia, the Greco-Romans, the Egyptians, and us. Now, without any delay, I would like to invite Mr. Soharde to help us learn how to write with all 5 senses through this exclusive workshop on exploring descriptive writing techniques. Please, Soharde, can we?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for that, Aniket. Good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible and visible? Could somebody confirm if I'm audible and visible? I'd just like to share my screen as well. So, is my screen visible? Can you see my screen, guys? Aniket, could you confirm if my screen is visible? Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So we'll get started with creative writing. As you can see, I'm going to talk about the introduction to the forms of creative writing and primarily also deal with exploring the creative writing space in general, because that's something that really is underrepresented. We talk about creative writing, we generally talk about the different formats of writing, but we don't really explore much, and especially as somebody in the industry already. I secured a traditional publishing deal way back in 2020 with Rupa Publications, one of India's major traditional publishers. And my latest work, Pratap Jung, which came out in 2023, was launched by the Nobel laureate Annie Ernaux as part of the Prime Minister's Yuva Fellowship by the Ministry of Education. So this was my debut, and I mean my latest as well, but definitely my debut traditionally published work from the National Book Trust India. So I think we'll just get going without further ado, because I've got around an hour in hand, and I would want to make this as interactive as possible. So please feel free to raise your hands whenever you've got queries or clarifications or want to participate actively, because that's something I'm really looking forward to. So firstly, I think just to give you an overview of what we're going to cover in today's session, this workshop will primarily take you on a journey across the several creative writing formats. We've got, the standard formats from fiction to poetry, novel writing, and also a bit about screenwriting, because again, like I said, that's a little, underrepresented when it comes to creative writing, and we'll uncover some of the secret, crafts to create compelling characters and immersive settings and dynamic plots. Because at the end of the day, we talk about secrets. I think you'll come to understand, towards the towards the midway of this particular presentation, that we're talking about inspiration. We're talking about how to be open, how to be receptive, to the environment around you, so as to ensure that there's a consistent flow of creativity and a consistent source of inspiration for you to derive that creativity from. In addition, I'm going to talk about screenwriting, like I said, because I'm a screenwriter. I'm working on my debut web series, a friend of mine, Aditya Suryavanshi, also from the PM Yuva cohort. So I'm going to talk a bit about the aspects of visual storytelling, about how one can properly structure screenplays and how to master the art of dialogues, basically. Because as you would know towards the end, dialogues are one way you can ensure there's a bond that's fostered between the character and the reader, and that the character's journey, the character's growth arc is effectively followed by the reader. And in order to ensure that the reader is immersed, more into the character's journey as he goes on navigating his world. So I'll start with a brief introduction to creative writing, but before that, I would invite some of you to probably talk about the creative writing experiences you have had. Would anyone be open to talking about creative writing experiences? Could be anything. You could be writing essays for schools and doing some poetry lessons. So if anybody would be willing to talk about their creative writing journey, Manshu, would you like to go first? Manshu, or could you unmute yourself?
Actually, can you raise your hand and Manshu Kumar, right?
Yeah, I think he raised his hand. Hitarth at the moment has his hand up, so we can go with Hitarth first. Hitarth,
Yeah.
do you wanna talk about your creative writing experience, the exposure you have had?
Okay. Chalte, one of the creative writing experiences I have had in recent times is I wrote a book for a competition called Bree Books, where I wrote two books actually, but the one I prefer the most is named Mystical Adventures of Miriam. It is a fantasy story about a girl who saves a colony of people, and the things that I mostly thought about was how if it was a real setting that it was being played in, how would characters react?
Right, so that's a very thought-provoking question, actually, and congratulations on the book. I'm sure many would love to read it. You can also drop the link to the chat if you want to. But that's a very thought-provoking question, and is actually something we may talk about today, because world building and characterization, the manner in which characters react to the changes, in the ambience, the changes in the atmosphere, the environment that they are within, is something that forms a very integral part of a writer's creative writing journey. Anybody else before we get started with an introduction? Anybody else with an exposure to the creative writing space has done something? Manway. Manway, you can unmute yourself and speak up. Navasha, would you want to talk about your exposure to the space?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Navasha here, and as the previous participant mentioned, I also have written a book in Rebooks, and I have also written many stories and poems.
Okay, congratulations on that, Navasha. What is your book about? What is it titled?
My book is about adventure of a teen and how she handles the mid school.
So is that in some way inspired by your own journey through mid school? Because it happens quite often. Your biggest inspiration is you. I think we'll come to that a little later as we venture into the workshop. But where did you find inspiration for the
My,
plot that you took up?
my inspiration My inspiration came from Wednesday, the what to say series,
Mm-hmm.
and
Interesting.
I also added up some series which I watch in my day-to-day life to come up with a wonderful story of Miss Nitu.
Amazing. Congratulations. You can also share the title of the book in the chat if you're able to. But we'll just get going with the introduction to creative writing. I'm sure many of you have had an exposure to this space before, so you do have an idea of what creative writing entails. I have given a very brief, kind of quirky introduction to creative writing in this particular paragraph. But to be very honest, creative writing has three central components. As a writer, you're supposed to tackle three central components in creative writing, which is you're supposed to build a world that is relatable. You're supposed to build a world that your audience relates to and is able to, follow. World building is a very important part of your game because you are essentially the architect. You play the god when you're writing a story, especially if it's a fictional setting, and you're supposed to create your world from the ground up, as it has been said in this particular slide. You need to create an immersive experience for your reader, so as to ensure that they're hooked, from the start to the end. Second comes to characterization. I think Hittard talked about, how his character responds to certain circumstances, in the environment, in the world that the character has been exposed to. So characterization becomes a very important component of creative writing. We talk about the several approaches to character building. So, for example, you've got the internal approach to character building, where you talk about the psychological bit, the emotional bit of your character, where your character is a bit sensitive towards, certain happenings within, that might affect him emotionally. You have an external approach to character building where certain developments outside the character's control could impact him, could impact the way he responds to the changes. You have the archetypal character building where you, for example, if we say, in screenwriting, we do is we mention, for example, the typical bad boy cliche. So cliche essentially is a certain, characterization, a set of characters which are seen to be the standard for a particular association. So we'll come to that again. Before that, we'll also talk about twists and turns. So, essentially your story is a linear format. Now, what exactly is a story, right? So what is a story? What do you think is a story? Anybody who would like to take this up, what do you think is a story? How do you define story in a single line? Hitar.
A story is basically the way the character experiences what is going around them and how it turns out to the end. And I want to say one thing about the topic that you said about cliches. One of the most popular archetypes for stories is where a Mary Sue type of character, basically a do-gooder, gets put in a setting where they can't behave the way they like and can't be as cheerful and as joyful as they are in their daily lives because of the hardships they are facing in the current story.
Right. Wonderful. In fact, I think that's kind of very similar to the traditional definition of a storyline, where if we look at a linear format for a storyline, you have a starting, you have a beginning, and you've got an end. And the character is supposed to navigate from the beginning to the end. The end is the ultimate objective the character is supposed to accomplish. And all through the linear pattern, you've got certain obstacles placed where, like you said, Hitar, the character is prevented or is contained from behaving in his usual pattern, in his usual way, which therefore results in the character and all sorts of plot moves, what we call the plot moves, and this hooking roller coaster ride that comes to being. So essentially, a storyline is a linear format. In a linear format, it's something where a character has a certain objective in mind, and to ensure that it reaches towards that ultimate objective, it has to go through certain hurdles, certain hurdles that leads to certain twists and turns, which again lead to this roller coaster ride we call a storyline. So that's a bit about what creative writing primarily entails. I mean, these are the three central components of a creative writing. You need to have a world which is immersive and relatable. You need to have a characterization which people can find human-like. So a character definitely needs to be human-like. It needs to be created in the image of a human and needs to behave in the way a human does. And again, you need to provide your people with a reason. So characters' backstory is often something that people can relate to. The reason why a character behaves the way he does is often the backstory. So characters, and then you have the character's growth arc, which is the twists and turns that happen throughout the storyline you've got that leads the character to behave in certain particular ways, which might not be usual, which might not be the usual standard or the normative standard for the character to behave. we move forward to a big question here. Before we get going to the formats of creative writing, and the question here is something I've faced very often at literary festivals and even at certain book discussions. So how do I consistently find inspiration and nurture my creative spark to produce compelling storylines? Now, the reason I'm talking about consistently finding inspiration is because there are two central aspects to this. Number one, people often talk about the writer's block or the creative block, where you are not able to find inspiration to get your creative hat on. And the second is when we have what I call when you're missing out in some sort of storyline and not able to move through in a consistent manner to ensure that your creative spark is left nurtured. So how do you consistently find inspiration so as to bring about your storyline? I just like to ask a few questions over here. I think these are given over here towards the bottom right. I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but have you ever thought about journaling? Uh, do you keep a diary or some sort of regular notebook that you keep updating? Anybody, have you ever thought of journaling, or do you keep a diary? Do you maintain a diary? Hisart again. Hisart is the most responsive one so far. Hisart, please unmute yourself.
Unmute. Okay. Sir, I want to say one thing about a way to find the inspiration and make storylines. As writing is itself a art, and we should try to find things and storylines from the real world and twist it into a way so it would be a compelling story. Such as a story that I thought of recently and I'm thinking of doing in Bree books this year is a story about a boy who is who consistently gets good marks and is the topper of his class, but because of a accident in a computer accidentally gets the result that he has failed and how he deals with it. And like this there are many ways to see and give examples from real life but twist them in a way so they are compelling and more interesting.
That's fantastic. It's in fact something that is an answer. So I'll just reveal the answer before we go forward. So you are your own inspiration, right? I mean, that is something that people can draw from whatever you just said, Hithard. Um, okay, I think Aniket, there's an issue with the mic. People said they're able to turn on the mic because that's not allowed by the host. Could you look into that?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Hi,
just a
you
second,
are.
Manvik, just a second. So Adi, the thing is that we have not given the rights to unmute them. So they'll have to raise your hand. So it's for the students. You have to raise your hands so that, you come in front of the screen and we'll unmute you.
Perfect. So guys, whenever you have something to say, just raise your hands and then they'll be able to unmute you. Manvay.
Yeah. Yes, I just wanted to say that I sometimes, write some things in my diary that happened with me. Like recently, some incident just happened in my bus where my friends were accusing me for something I did not do. So I just maintain a book which I write in.
Wonderful. So that is what we call journaling, right? So journaling is basically writing about the daily experiences you've got, the daily emotions that you experience, the observations that you're able to garner from looking around yourself and learning about the environment and the ambience around yourself, basically. I think somebody else had their hand up as well. I'm not sure if they got it up till now. They've not.
Her name was Monica, I think.
Okay. Monica, do you want to speak or should we go forward? Okay, we'll just go forward. Manvir spoke about journaling. Hithart talked about finding inspiration from your daily lives, and definitely, like the answer says, you are your own inspiration. So where do you find inspiration? You find inspiration from your daily lives, and what authors, what creative writers generally do is what we do is we tend to in some way derive inspiration from the very experiences, the very emotions that we experience, the perceptions we've got about certain circumstances, certain places. If those are, for example, I'll just tell you something, that I have experienced personally. I was recently in Lucknow. Last year I was in Lucknow for, going around the British residency premises, and I also explored Kaiser Bagh. Traveling, in fact, is something that's always been very inspiring for me, because when I travel, I get to experience a whole set of, I get to have a whole set of observations, a whole set of new perceptions about that particular place, a visualization that I wouldn't have been able to process without actually being there. So, traveling does form one big component of where you derive your inspiration from. And it is in experiencing these new things that you're able to, later derive inspiration. So, for example, my latest work, Pratap Jung, The Ultimate Sacrifice, the one, Aniket talked about initially, published as part of the PM Yuvas team, it has a lot about Lucknow, it has a lot about Kaiser Bagh, it has a lot about these places that I went to and experienced firsthand. Because when you experience things firsthand, you're able to have a complete visualization, a very strong visualization, a solid visualization of the narrative in mind, the storyline you have in mind. So, a tip for those who haven't been, journaling, or who haven't really been able to find their inspirations for the storylines, and the next time you're out somewhere, try thinking about the, like it says over here, the textures, the smells, the sound, the tastes, and the sights. Our topic for the day actually talks about writing with your senses, right? So sensory writing is something that's a central, key component of descriptive writing. And you need to be very structured in your approach to sensory writing. So you need to think about and process the different things you see around yourself, feel around yourself. It is in that you're able to understand and comprehend, and then able to finally put those or express those, on a blank piece of paper. So another way, another tip for you, if you're looking to go into creative writing, would actually be to reflect on your experiences. So it's not just having these experiences. For example, I think Manbhai talked about his friends accusing him on bus, for something they didn't really do. So you should pause and reflect on what actually caused your friends to behave in that manner. So that brings the backstory. That brings about the backstory. Is it a conspiracy hatched by your friends to demean you or something like that? So I mean, it could lead to several interesting dimensions. We're not going to talk about that, but it could both be big dimensions and insubstantial ones. But for a creative writer, it's always about the thought process that matters, and not a central storyline that you have in mind at the very start. Another thing for creative writers looking to establish themselves, to have a to basically cultivate an audience for themselves, would be to participate in creative writing contests. So people often ask me, ask me at literary festivals and everything, what about the creative writers block? So, for example, if I'm not able to find inspiration or derive inspiration from around me and everything, what do I do? So essentially, you have several creative writing contests out there. I think Books That Matter is organizing something, in Maharashtra and certain South Indian states. You've similarly got the Royal Commonwealth Society, which urges young children to write essays. Some of those are creative ones, some of those can be academic standard essays each year. So in these essay competitions, you're provided with certain prompts. So, for example, begin your sentence with, say, for example, I mean, many of you here are from the, I guess, CBSE and ICSE boards. So you should be used to certain questions of this sort in your composition, in the English language paper that you have at school. For example, begin a short story that starts with the door closed all of a sudden and everything, all that sort basically. So this is a prompt. This is what urges you to think about that particular storyline, to actually, process what's going on in there, and then, relate that to your own creative ideas you've got in mind, to ensure that you have a spark of creativity, and then, carry forward the entire storyline. That's the second way you can go about it. I think two big ways to hone your creative writing skills would actually be to, journal daily, something that both Hitat and Manbhai do. And secondly, to also, if you wish to participate in these creative writing contests, because they're a wonderful platform for you, they provide a wonderful exposure to you as a newbie writer, looking to start yourself, looking to have a start for yourself in the industry. We'll just move on to the next slide. which is about the different forms of creative writing and the various elements that make your work compelling. Um, Anybody over here, would you like to talk about the different forms of creative writing you're aware of? What do you think are the major standard forms of creative writing that exist, and which is the one that you are most proficient at? Hit us again.
So there are many types of creative writings that are mostly famous, but some of the ones that are used in our school are first of all prompt writing, where we have been given a starting paragraph for the story and we have to continue it. Or there is also poem writing, where we have to write a poem with a meaning, but not just rhyming like the poems that we hear in a nursery, but actually having a meaning in the poem. And there are many types of poem in creative writing, one of them being haikus, which are 3-line poems which usually have a moral meaning. So there are many different kinds of creative writings that are popular in the world, but mostly in CBSE schools there is story writing and poem writing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the insights. We have somebody else. Okay. Grishma sent me a DM that says essay writing, story writing. Perfect. Manvai, you have something to say, I guess.
Yes, my favorite, I have 3, 4 favorite in creative writing, which are, artistic poems, story writing, and essay writing. I like the
Mhm.
essay writing the most because, I can use any word I want and share my thoughts on the topic that is given to me. And in artistic poem, like I like using adjectives and learning new words.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So before we get on to explore the different, poetry, script writing, fiction, and non-fiction, Ashta says, Grishma again says diary writing, article like writing. Yeah, thanks for all of that. We'll basically broadly categorize these into 4 different forms, which I'm going to talk about a little later. Before that, I'm just going to talk about genre mashup and experimenting as well. Have you ever thought about the different genres that exist? We talked about fiction, we talked about non-fiction, we talked about poetry, we talked about essays as well. So these are the different forms, the broad forms. We've got poetry, we've got essays, we've got novel writing, under which you have both fiction and non-fiction, all the different genres that exist, and you've got screenwriting, which essentially is, I think somebody mentioned screenwriting. Ashta mentioned script writing. So essentially, that's screenwriting, which is when you write for films and television series. Many of you might have seen series like, I mean, somebody talked about Wednesday. Somebody might have seen Friends. There's a new OTT space in Bollywood. Where you have series like Jubilee, Made in Heaven, and all sorts being dropped, which are very very famed ones. So writing for the silver screen essentially is screenwriting, writing, fiction, non-fiction in a novel or novella format as a full-fledged work, or book as a novel writing. You've got essay writing, you've got poetry. But before we get on with this, I would like to talk about developing a unique perspective. Now, we talk about the various elements that make your work compelling. Have any of you ever had this thought that, I've got a storyline in mind, but the storyline is already out there. It's published. It's published by a renowned author. People have, studied, or people have gone through this particular storyline before. So what essentially is it that I am contributing? Have you had this doubt that has prevented you from writing any further? Because many of my connections and people have asked me, similar questions and requests before, have actually faced this, sort of self-doubt, where they believe that they haven't got anything substantial to contribute to a particular storyline because apparently their storyline's already been covered. So before I get on to explore poetry, because if you talk about poetry, one famous branch of poetry is actually love poetry. Everybody writes love poetry. People write poems about nature. The English romantic poems, for that, poets for that matter. But if you say that you haven't got anything original to contribute, to what extent is that true? This is something I talk here in the second pointers of the tips here. Let me just highlight that. Can you see the highlight, everybody? Can you, is the highlight visible? Right. So, remember, if you have a unique perspective, you have the ability to cultivate an audience. So, when a reader picks up a book, it is not the storyline, it's not just the storyline that they're going to, look at or go through. It's essentially also your unique voice, your unique perspective, the manner in which you build the world that they're going to look at. And everybody, because they've had unique experiences in their journey, throughout their life, they've got a very unique backstory that people Okay, somebody says they can't hear me and see me. Is that right, everybody? Am I audible and visible? Could somebody confirm?
Yes, you are audible and visible.
Okay, Aryan, I think you'd need to, rejoin. There might be connectivity issues on your end. Anyway, moving on. Hishart, have you got anything to say?
Yeah, I want to give an example of the topic that you said, having a unique perspective for things. One of the things that comes to my mind when you said this is a type of Japanese comic book writing manga and a specific genre in it, which is called shonen, because most of the shonen which are popular nowadays basically have the same storyline, where the main character has a grand dream, whether it being the pirate king or the wizard king or whatever it is, and having some sort of problem which hinders them, but then eventually finding a way to overcome it with some sort of new abilities and friends on the way. As many of the stories in the shonen genre follow the same format, but still we cannot say that one story is an exact copy of another, and sometimes there can be even closer things which are relative to each other, such as I want to give an example of two very famous mangas, Hunter and Naruto, which basically have the exact same story with just the words and some things differentiated, but because of the unique perspective of the writer of that story, are feel completely different and are as important as each other in providing a unique perspective into the genre.
Very much so. Very much so. In fact, what she talked about, manga is not the only, is not the only format that talks about this particular storyline where you have a character overcoming obstacles and hurdles on their way to, accomplishing their goals. In fact, that's the set standard for every single storyline that exists out there. So, so yeah, I mean, moving on. Do we have anybody else who's had their hands up? Okay, Lokesh. Lokesh, would you want to say anything? Manshu, Lokesh, anybody?
Please raise your hands if you want to connect with Sohadir, or you want to ask a question or say anything. Please raise your hands. Okay, I think they must have accidentally. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just get going. Now another thing when you're talking about creative writing, I just mentioned the several forms we've got there. I think Hitar talked also about genres and I mean even in terms of the even in terms of when we talk about fictional novels, we talk about novel writing. We've got several genres out there. When we talk about essay writing, we've got several genres like narrative, expository, descriptive, and argumentative essay writing genres out there. We've got in novel writing, historical novels, historical fiction, science fiction novels, horror novels, fantasy novels, and whatnot. So, how do you, as a budding creative writer, decide what your calling is? One way to do that would be to practice what we call genre mashup or experimenting. So experimenting with different genres, I'll just give an example over here. I have a friend of mine from the PMU cohort called Ashish Chakraborty. She's a best-selling author with Rupa, and she's published a book recently from PMU as well. Her second work, which is titled "The 13-Year-Old Queen," is actually historical fiction. Set against the backdrop of the resistance to the British somewhere around 1910 to 1915. Her first work was a more contemporary fiction, a more contemporary young adult fiction. Um, Manshu, you're not audible. You were not audible the last time, so we'll just have a look at that another next time you speak up. So yeah, I mean, Ashisha, what she did is she experimented with different genres. She's got contemporary fiction, the young adult genre. She's also got some expertise in the historical fiction genre. And now that she's had an experience with both these genres, she's found her calling. She's found her taste, which is to maybe go into contemporary or to go into historical fiction, whatever you find most comfortable with. So, experimenting with genres during the initial stages of your writing career is really important, and not just genres within a particular subset of creative writing, but also across the different formats of creative writing, which we are, talking about over here. Poetry essentially is the most evocative of the forms of creative writing we have, because over here in poetry, what you're trying to do is you're trying to connect with your reader using figurative language, using metaphorical messages, using implicit messages. You're leaving certain messages for your readers, but those are in the metaphorical, in the figurative, in a very sheathed sort of context. So, for example, if we talk about poems, you would see that many of them are actually inspired by personal experiences and convictions of particular poets. So I'll just give you an example of Dover Beach. Dover Beach was written by Matthew Arnold, and this particular poem is set against the backdrop of a certain time when you have a conflict between religion, which used to play a significant role in controlling societal norms, and the modern technological advancements that have suddenly emerged after the period of industrialization in England. So Matthew Arnold's conviction is that religion is some sort of brings some sort of morality, brings some sort of order to the world, without which we're falling apart. And it is about this particular conviction that he talks about in his poem, The Dover Beach. The Dover Beach is a very classic, masterpiece in poetry. We consider it to be very traditional and a very classic masterpiece. And it's of course in a very lyrical format. But you can also have free verse poetry. You can have poetry. I think Hitar talked about haiku, which is essentially a traditional Japanese medieval poetry. Usually nature poetry is covered in haiku, but recently we've moved on to incorporating haiku in the English language as well. So you'd have a lot of haikus being published in English. Um, so that is a bit about poetry. You usually use evocative visual imagery in poems. If you guys have got anything to share about poems, any personal experiences reading poets, or if any of you here are occasional poets, I would be more than open to listen to your experiences or your thoughts on poetry. Because I'm not going to speak in detail about poems and ballades and sonnets and everything. That could be a lot of jargon, and plus I've got a paucity of time over here. So, if you would like to share something about your experience, reading or writing poems, please feel free to. Navasha.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah. Please go on.
Yes, sir. I have, as I had mentioned earlier also, I have written many poems, and I have maintained a poetry book where I have written some poems occasionally.
Hmm. So,
I have
so what
I
kind of
have
poems do you write, Navasha? What kind of poems do you write? Poems based on personal experiences, or poems, like the romantic poets of England used to, based on your love for nature, romanticizing, or do you write post-colonial literature, which is about the horrors of partition and everything? I mean, you have several sets over there, so nothing very very specific. But what do you write about?
about like my own personal life experiences which I face in day-to-day life.
Hmm.
I also write some poems about the society's problems and the solutions, I think, which could be useful for the society.
Wonderful. So those are poems with a broader social issue, like a social message, right?
Yeah,
That's a very brilliant thing to do. Congratulations on that. Actually, you should probably read out some of your poetry sometime later, or maybe
yeah.
send a link on the chat through which to access your poetry later on. So thank you very much for that. Um,
Welcome.
we'll move on. We'll now talk about essay. I think somebody here said they're really passionate about essay writing. So essay writing again is like I said, it's a written expression of thoughts and opinions. So again, convictions play a very big role in essay writing. Essays again can be personal. If you for example are doing journaling, if you're writing for your diary, if you're writing about your daily experiences, those are what we call personal essays. A personal could be narrative essays. You could have descriptive essays, and then there's a second thing we talk about, which is the academic essays, the broader, the more academic version of essays, where you try to, base your essay around the central argument. We're exploring, let's say, something that is of real academic significance. So, for example, people talking about, I'll just give you, an example because this is something I recently wrote about. I recently wrote about the correlation between happiness in a society and the income that's generated. So it's basically, something that comes under happiness economics, the well-being economics. So this is something that would, constitute, a broader part of the of what we call the academic essay. Within personal essay, again, you have got the SOPs, or the statement of purposes, or personal statements that you use to apply to certain universities in India and also to universities abroad, especially in the UK and the US. So even personal statements become a form of your written expression of thoughts about yourself and how you're trying to put yourself out there. Essays generally have a lot of emphasis on creative analysis. Now, these are the bold, highlighted words I've got, and evaluatory exploration. So you're trying to evaluate your experiences. You're trying to evaluate or understand how your experiences have shaped your career direction and why you're trying to. So if we talk about personal statements for that matter, let's say you write a personal statement for a course, in history that you're willing to pursue at some, institute abroad, maybe in the UK. So how do you connect the dots? You, for example, could state that you had some experience working for a certain NGO, that deals in international affairs, and then you understood that in order to explore that, the way in which different nations work, the relationship that certain nations share, the diplomatic relationship for that matter, it's really useful to have an idea, have a context of what caused them to behave that way. So the causation is what leads you to find history interesting and instrumental. To see history as something that's instrumental in understanding the modern world and why the modern world is the way it is, and why interstate actors basically work the way they do. Essays, again, like you must have studied at school, could be argumentative, descriptive, narrative, and expository. Now, I haven't got much time, so I'll just give you a brief idea what these are. I'm sure you already have got an overview of these. So, narrative essay could be a personal experience, could be a fictional account. They could be centered around a certain theme, or could have a particular lesson to it. You've got structure again. Narrative essays do tend to have this very big chronological order, where you have a certain storyline which has a beginning, a middle, and the end. A very popular example of narrative essay would be, I'm not sure how many of you read it, but George Orwell is a famous writer who wrote a narrative essay once called Hanging. Hanging is a brilliant example, a classic masterpiece when it comes to narrative essays written in a descriptive and engaging language, which immerses readers in a particular world. So essentially, a short form of fiction is something we could call narrative essay. We come to descriptive essays next. Descriptive is mostly about, you've got to have very great vocabulary when it comes to description, because you've got to describe a person or place or experience in a very rich format, in a very, sensory rich portrayal. So that really does matter when you talk about descriptive writing. For example, I think White is a very famous author, who wrote an essay called Once More to the Lake, which was a work of descriptive, essay writing. Expository essay, what exactly is about exposition? Exposition is certainly about informing or explaining a particular person and analyzing a certain topic using evidence. And expository essays could be written objectively, unlike descriptive essays or narrative essays, where you tend to have an ontological bias. The author has their own perception somewhere at the end of the day in narrative and descriptive essays. But when you talk about expository essays, you need to be concise and clear and have a very objective viewpoint, and steer clear of the mainstream biases you've got. Argumentative essay again is a very broad academic format where you need to present a specific, well rational argument as to why you're taking a particular issue, or why you're backing a certain set standard based on your evidence and your own reasonings. That's a bit about the different styles of essay that we've got. um, I'll just move forward. Okay, I think somebody has written something on the chat. Krishna says, I feel essays and screenwriting are the easiest forms of creative writing. They're not very hard. Okay, unfortunately, Grishma, I beg to disagree, because I am a screenwriter working on my debut web series. So screenwriting is comparatively harder than novel writing, because in novel writing, you've got the freedom to do a lot of description, to do a lot of visual rich, sensory portrayals. Unlike what we do in screenwriting, screenwriting has to be very concise. Screenwriting has to follow a certain set standard, a certain set format. So yeah, screenwriting is easy, but you need to be familiar with the technicalities. So, for example, there's a lot of jargon that's used in screenwriting. If you are well aware and well familiar with all of that, I think screenwriting is a piece of cake. Yes, given you have a good storyline in mind and how to hook your audience. So moving on, we come to novel writing. Um, Before that, has anybody got anything to share about essay writing? I'll just pause for 2 minutes to see if you guys have got anything to say, anything to speak about essay writing for that matter. Anybody, anything? Hithart, please.
Sir, can I add about sir? Can I add my thoughts on the topic that you said that novel writing is easier than screenwriting?
I didn't say novel writing is easier than screenwriting, Hithart. I meant to say novel writing is a very different form of creative writing, and the two cannot be relatively compared as to which one's easier and which one's not. What matters is you've got a very good plot or a storyline in mind. Because I have written both novels and I'm working in the screenwriting dimension, so I have seen that transition firsthand. Despite what many people might claim, screenwriting is not as easy as it seems. In fact, it's one of the hardest forms of creative writing, because you've got to have very great ideal figures of speech. But yeah, sure, do share your views as well.
Why the screenwriting may be harder than it seems, because unlike in a novel where a person has willingly put his time to read a novel and is genuinely interested in it, most of the time when a person puts on the show is to relax and watches what's in front of them. So it is more of a, you have to put more of an effort to keep the person inside the story at all times. That's why most popular shows in India or in other countries usually are comedic shows which have a simple storyline. Let's just take an example of one of the most popular shows in India, Tarak Mehta, which has a simple A to B storyline, and but instead of having deep meanings about the things that they're doing, are simple things that you might encounter in a day-to-day life, but obviously in an unrealistic standard, so people can they relate to it and do not think much about it, so they can have amazing experience. And we can also see that when we are translating a piece of fiction into, say, a piece of written fiction into a piece of media, such as, let's take an example of a book series, Harry Potter, which in the final battle in the books has a deep meaning of how Voldemort died, as his The goal was to be immortal, but died as a mortal man in Caltech and bled out. But to keep people's attention in the movies, they showed him being destroyed like a piece of paper burning. And Caltech completely threw out the end symbolisms of the story so people would see the fancy effects and be enthralled by it.
Okay, Hithar, just a few points over here. Firstly, Tarak Mehta Ka Ulta Chashma is no great example, when it comes to screenwriting. In fact, if you want to talk about Indian OTT platforms, I think screenwriting, certain web series like Jubilee, which is a recent work of Vikramaditya Motwain, a legendary director, and Shomik Sen would be a better example. Second, you've got Made in Heaven by Zoya Akhtar and Rima Kagti, who are master filmmakers in their domain. So, when you talk about screenwriting is a long process. It takes a screenwriter around 7 to 8 drafts to actually bring out the first, copy of their plot of their storyline. Post which you need to take into account the audience's perception. So unlike novel writing, where you leave it to your audience to go back and refer to your work, screenwriting is based upon a format where the audience is able to follow, with your story as you move along. So you are supposed to understand, as a writer, you will have to understand the flow. You'll have to understand the technicalities which become, involved when you talk about the manner in which your audience is able to relate to your story or is able to follow with your story. The thing that you see on the screen, has had 2 to 3 years of work. Underground work, backstage work, which has been done by the screenwriters and the directors. Who come together to decide how this particular story is to be, put on the silver screen. And I'm speaking this from an insider's perspective because unlike novel writing, where you can have a lot of emphasis on description, where you can have a lot of emphasis on character building with intricate plots, and definitely with metaphorical and immersive explorations. In screenwriting, what really matters is your dialogues. What matters is the dynamic scenes you've got to keep your audience hooked. And also certain transitions. Transitions become really difficult for a screenwriter to master. Again, you've got to have a relatable character growth arc, and you've also got to understand that figures of speech like onomatopoeia, for example. I'm not really sure if you've seen a screenwriting format before. You've probably not seen a screenwriting format before, but if you have, you'd understand that certain figures of speech like onomatopoeia become really important for a screenwriter to master. So, for example, the manner in which a dog barks. When you write a book here, you can just simply state that the dog barks. When you write a screenplay, you need to define how the dog barks, because it is a direction for the director to understand, a direction for the production designer and the sound designer to understand how exactly the dog barks. It's your viewpoint that's being put out there to make other creators equally associated and invested in your project as much as you are. So I think that would be my take on screenwriting. But again, yeah, sure, you've got your own perspective. But those are, a few great examples. Thanks for that. We'll just move on to a bit about the subsets of novel writing because I haven't got much time in hand. We've got historical novels, like I said, which could be set in, specific historical periods. These could be non-fiction works, non-fiction academic works of, historical importance, could be original accounts, or could be historical fiction works, rich with historical context. You've got science fiction and fantasy novels, which I'm sure many of you have read. You've got Dune, by Frank Herbert, which is one of the finest, science fictions, contemporary science fictions, because it was recently made into a film. Dune Part 1 came out, I think, in 2022. Dune Part 2 is upcoming. So, science fiction has the ability to transport you into an imaginary world, which has a lot of futuristic technology and certain magical realism associated as well. Next, we come to mystery, horror, and thrillers. These often revolve around very suspenseful plots where the character navigates through all of these, solving certain mysteries or overcoming their, fears, obstacles, overcoming certain dangers, and have and solve certain intriguing puzzles and go through certain plot twists. Next, you've got romance novels, which I'm sure the name itself clarifies what it is, and you've got literary fiction, which are character-driven novels. Literary fiction, I'll just give you an example of what literary fiction is all about. Many of you might have heard about To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which is probably one of the biggest bestsellers of our time. And this addresses, from the character's perspective, racial injustice and moral growth. So from the character's perspective, novels that are driven to privatize a deep exploration of the internal issues could be characterized as literary fictions. And of course, you've got young adults, contemporary novels like Ashish Shah's First Walk, Misadventures of Salesburger Rupa. So let's move forward. These are some of the standards you're supposed to follow when writing a novel or any particular creative writing work for that matter. You are not to use fancy jargons in excess, because that's something I've seen newbie writers doing. You're just supposed to be very simplistic and to the point, and you're supposed to widen your vocabulary definitely, because you're not supposed to repeat. You need to have substitutes, to ensure that the reading process is much more streamlined for your audience. But you not use fancy words. Do not use fancy words in excess. And you've got to have a very important focus on your visual description, because especially as a historical fiction writer, I feel building a world rests to some extent on the visual depiction, on the visual, visualization that you're able to create, on the visualization that you're able to create so as to immerse your reader in that particular world. Moving forward, here's some parting advice. Readers, I think most of you here are very voracious readers. So only the top 1% make it to the industry as good writers. So, keep reading. You'd find inspiration automatically. Keep writing as well. Experimentation across genres, like I said, and cultivating an audience is something we talk about a little more. Is something that should be on the top of your list. Live your characters' experiences, or if you're writing a fictional work, an entirely fictional work, try to live your character's point of view. Try to understand what causes your characters to behave in a particular way. Basically, be the god of your own universe, be the creator of your own universe, and you'd see that you're reliving the experience in a much better way than you think you would. Also, be receptive to feedback, because critical feedback, is a very important part for writers' growth process. So once you have a book out there, it might be trashed by critics. The big thing is that you have your book out there, so congratulations on that. But again, feedbacks are meant to accelerate your growth. Critics very often tend to be harsh, but when they are harsh, you usually have certain set pointers in mind, which you as a writer are not supposed to trash or bash, but is supposed to incorporate, and then your growth process as a writer is automatically inhibited. So that's something, that's some parting advice from my end. I'd also like to emphasize before we going on the research segment, because we have been talking about world building, we've been talking about characterization. How do you know? Let's say, for example, you write a novel which is set in the Delhi of 1810. So how do you know how Delhi was like in 1810? So you go through a standard set framework, a structured framework for research. Essentially, you've got three different segments in research. You've got the primary research, the secondary research, and tertiary research. Primary research entails first-hand resources. You go and you interview, generational descendants. You interview descendants of certain families which had been very prominent in the Delhi of 1810. That's the first thing you can always do. Second, you can, refer to contemporary accounts and contemporary sources. So, for example, my book, Pratap Jung, The Ultimate Sacrifice, actually refers to several significant sources and journal documentations from 1858 in order to reconstruct the events the way they happened back at the British residency in Lucknow. Primary research can very much include traveling, because there's something I specifically emphasized on earlier. Traveling to the particular place, generating a blueprint, and outline of how the place is like, the set structures you've got over at that place, and then bringing those down and on paper. So that's a bit about primary research. We come to secondary research, which is about the existing literature. So you have several authors who come before you written on the same subject. Especially for academic research, secondary research becomes really significant, because you are meant to. This is a very standard procedure. You are supposed to analyze, synthesize, and interpret data, collecting those from several sources, such as books and academic papers, when articles and reports, and even films, films in the sense documentaries, historical documentaries, for example, the ones that are shown on History TV 18. I'm sure many of you often follow History TV. There are certain documentaries on National Geographic, anything which is a documentary in particular that you can refer to in order to, write your thing, in order to write your narrative, in order to build your narrative, could be considered a part of, your secondary research work. Tertiary research is a more broad-ranging research. So, it's called a summarized research. We tend to call it summarized because it's usually encyclopedias and films, which generate references for every writer writing in a particular thematic component for that matter. One big thing for any debut writer, one big thing for any budding writer, in fact, is to understand that every great writer starts somewhere. So use the digital platforms you have in hand. In today's day and age in particular, you've got several platforms, listed a few of them over here. It's called Substack, you've got LinkedIn newsletters, you've got Scrollstack, and you've got Wattpad. Most of these are free digital platforms that you can leverage to build your brand. LinkedIn newsletters in particular is a platform where you're able to share your insights with the wider professional world. So, for example, if you're writing on well-being economics, you can connect those with people with well-being economists who actually they're on LinkedIn, and so you can actually foster a bond with professional people with a network of experts out there on LinkedIn, and generate potential collaboration opportunities. Now, these platforms, you can refer to these platforms later on. But what these platforms help you do is document your thoughts, experiences, and stories. And again, consistency, like I said, is the key. So one way of doing journaling, one way of maintaining a diary in today's day and age is actually maintaining that online, is to actually create newsletters and write about your experiences and gain feedback from the wider community of readers who are out there on a particular platform. I'm sure many of you might be interested in using these platforms. So do feel free to hit me up, or even ask Aniket for this presentation, because I've shared it with him already. Aniket, could you share this further with the audience after the talk is done? Because these are certain platforms that you can leverage on. Now, I'll talk a bit about getting published. So, when you're talking about getting published, that shouldn't be the first thing upon your mind, because there's, especially in the traditional publishing world, we tend to follow a certain approach we call the growth process. So, a writer's growth process is firstly to find your calling. So, write, do journal documentations, do online blogging till the time you find your genre. And once you've done that, try cultivating an audience. An audience in the sense, people who are gonna wait there, who are gonna be there for you to wait on your next on your upcoming work. Post that, pitch after research. Pitch after research is because what I've seen people do is often reach out to certain finished publications who are not specifically in the dimension that they're writing. So, for example, if you're writing poetry, don't pitch to Penguin India, because Penguin India doesn't accept poetry pitches nowadays. So you got to do your due research of which publications accept what, and it is only after that that you're supposed to pitch to a particular publisher. And if your pitch is rejected, it's very common, because even every writer faces rejection at some point of time or the other. You're not to take that as a way of being discouraged or something, but rather you should see in that a growth opportunity and try to leverage on the advice that's given to you by the editor that's rejected you, and rework seriously on your manuscript, and then repitch to some different publication in the domain that you think might be interested in publishing you. Again, here I've got some more tips on how you can become a better writer. You've got to write consistently. You can do online courses on edX, Coursera, Udemy. I'm sure many of you are aware of these online platforms. And you've got to get feedback from third party, or either from your family members, but certainly feedback from people who are not biased and would give you very critical feedback of your work, because that's really important. Critical feedback is important, to help enable a constructive development of your own self as writer. Again, write for yourself, not for the world. Understand why you need that storyline or that narrative to be out there before the world or in the market, because you've got to find that inner urge. It's not every day that you come up with storylines, decide, okay, let me publish a work or something. You've got to tell that story. So you need to figure out why is your message important? How does that contribute to society as a whole? So, write for yourself, not for the world. At the same time, try to bridge your experiences with the world and enable an understanding of how your experiences contribute to the world or contribute to society in general. And use certain tools if you feel like using, because at the end of the day, when teaching something, Your grammatical syntax and everything is really taken into context. So feel free to use Grammarly or Hemingway Editor. I'm not recommending any of these per se, but these are something I have used. I used to use, beforehand. Again, you've got certain fellowships and engagements. I recently did my UG Cert in history at the University of Cambridge, and I'm now doing, I'll be an incoming Think Big Scholar at the University of Bristol. So there were certain fellowships and engagements, such as the University of Iowa's Creative Writers Fellowship for children under the age of 16. So these are things that you guys can apply to and leverage on. Even the British Council in India, they've got certain creative writing courses. They've got certain creative writing MOOCs. MOOCs are massive online open courses and workshops and conducted regularly. So you can actually participate in these, enroll on these, and take advantage of connecting with experts in the domain and getting their feedback, or actually enabling this conversation between you and your expert to understand the process, to understand the industry better, and more specifically so because you get this insider's perspective when you talk about workshops. So I think that's it from my end. I'm pretty sure we exceeded the time limit by 10 minutes. I'm really sorry about that, Aniket, but I'm sure I was able to contribute something that you'd be able to take away from, made sentence be a step closer to the great writer you meant to be. And should you have any clarifications, feel free to raise your hand now or reach out to me directly at the email address provided. I'm just going to share that on the chat as well. Also, here is my work, Put Up John, The Ultimate Sacrifice. I'm just going to drop that in the chat too, should you wish to give it a read. It's a historical fiction work set against the backdrop of India's first war of Indian independence. This is set in Oud and was published as part of the Prime Minister's Yuva scheme of the Ministry of Education's Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav components. And this was launched recently at the recently concluded New Delhi World Book Fair by Nobel laureate Annie Ernaux from France. And I'm going to share the link to the chat. So here's a link to the work. Do feel free to grab a copy or to let me know if you've got any clarifications or questions, anything absolutely. But I think that's it from my end.
Okay, thank you so much, Sohadev, for this wonderful session. I'm sure that students enjoyed this session. And, you've been a motivation to me also. I'll confess that I've been, procrastinating since 3 years. I want to write a novel and I've been procrastinating for 3 years. And you rightly pointed out that start now. Now is the time. So it would be my same advice to the students that you can take out 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day, or even 30 minutes during the weekend. That would still, be better than procrastinating for 3 years. You'll still end up with something at the end. So start now. So now moving on to the questions from our curious students. If you have any question, please raise your hands and we'll pick you up one by one, and you may ask your question to Mr. Sohadev. So any questions, please raise your hands. I think, Sohadev, you answered them all together during the session one by one.
Well, thank you so much for that. I really hope there was something to take away from. And thank you, Aniket, for having me on board. It was brilliant, reconnecting with the camp platform. I think Hardik has got a question. Hardik?
Yes, that's Hardik. Can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, actually, I did not understand tertiary research.
Tertiary research, right? So tertiary research is a third component, a third segment of your research. After you're done with your primary and secondary research, if there's anything that you want to have a broader look at, so you must have heard about encyclopedias, right, Hardik? Hardik, have you heard about encyclopedias?
Yes, I have heard about encyclopedias.
Right, so what do encyclopedias do? Encyclopedias provide you information in a very summarized and electronic format. So this is something we call tertiary research. Tertiary research is when you do your research in a broad-ranging manner without actually delving into the nuances of your topic without actually having the need to go through the very, what should I call them, the very grains of your topic, the very components of your topic per se. So tertiary research is more broad ranging. You can also, for example, look at certain films. So for example, if we talk about historical fiction work, if you want to write on something that's set in the 1980s, you could refer to any of the Bollywood movies back then to have a generalized idea about how the city in general, the culture, the customs used to be back then. So anything that provides you a summarized and generalized outline of specific topics without actually delving into the nuances could be considered a part of your tertiary research. I think that helped answer your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Hardik.
Swati, as you pointed out, that you wanted to share the presentation with the students.
Right, yeah, I did.
Yes, for that, I'd like to mention that what we can do is we'll be sharing the recording with the students, and in the YouTube, you can, in the description in YouTube, you can find the link for the PDF for the presentation. So you can access the video as well as the presentation on YouTube. All right, okay. So Sahadev, before ending the session, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you for taking the time and guiding us on how we can write more descriptively using all our 5 senses. I thoroughly enjoyed the session. I'm sure the students also did.
Thank you so much, Aniket. Thank you to Camp for having me once again. I mean, I participated in their Achievers session a while back. Yeah,
yes.
So this is my second time on Camp, and very glad to connect with all these young minds out here. In fact, we've got a very enthusiastic audience today. Very interactive. So thank you so much for having me on board.
Definitely, and we hope you'll be a member with us. You'll be organizing more events with you.
Absolutely, would love to be part. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Last but not the least, I would like to remind you that registrations for NASA 2023 and the scientific excursions are open. To know more about Camp's upcoming scientific excursions and how to participate in them, please check out the link in the chat below. Don't miss out the opportunity to visit various prestigious labs and organizations like the CSIR, ISRO, DRDO, and many others. If you have any further questions or need additional support, feel free to reach out at any of our social media handles or helpline numbers. We are here to assist you on your path to success. Thank you for your active participation and dedication to personal and professional growth. Also, we would love to hear your feedback so we can keep improving our content. Please fill out this feedback form and let us know your thoughts. Don't worry, your answers will be anonymous. We would also appreciate if you could share a small testimonial video describing how this knowledge sharing session by Camp helped you. You can either upload the video to your social media handle and tag us, or share the video with us and we'll directly post it on our social media handles. So I'm sharing with you the link for the feedback form. Please take a few minutes and fill out the feedback form. We would really appreciate it. Also, I'd like to announce that our next workshop would be on programming, Java programming. So how many of you would be attending that workshop on 31st August at 4 p.m.? Please, can you raise your hand if you'd like to attend the workshop on Java programming? Amazing. So by next week, we'll be sharing the link for that workshop also. You can register and sign up and attend the workshop on 31st August at 4 p.m. Also share the word with your friend. They can also join. All right, amazing. Thank you, everyone. Please, can you fill out the Google form? This is a small feedback form that will help us improve our workshop. You can tell us which kind of workshops you would like for us to conduct in the future, which workshops you'd love to attend. Please take out a moment and fill out the Google form, how much you enjoyed the workshop or what learnings you took from this session, how good the session was. Thank you so much.